we were super excited to be here and all this stuff. And all of a sudden I'm jobless. And I was like, so I came out, it was like 9 o'clock, 9:30 in the morning. And I said, hey, I just got laid off. I was sort of at a loss. I didn't know what to do. And she goes, go surf. She goes, go surf. When you come back, you'll know what to do.
Hey, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. So I held my promise, and today I started the updated draft of the book. So for anybody keeping score, I made it. I sliced my finger open on Saturday. Oh no, let's back this up. Friday afternoon, huge windstorm, bam, power goes out. And I had not charged my computer up, so I was sitting in the house with the lights going down. My wife was working on something at the couch, and I'm just watching the power go down on my computer, trying to get things done in preparation for today. And then Saturday, we went out there to do window cleaning, and I sliced the tip of my index finger. But I'm like, everything is fighting me to get this done. But anyway, I started this morning using this revision guide. I'll see how effective it is in the long run, but I really enjoyed the process of putting it together. I learned a lot more about my novel and my characters. Now the goal is to get this all done by early May, which is a huge order because it's a huge book. So I'm cautiously optimistic. But yeah, so we'll see what happens. Just lots. Oh, and I didn't mention this week's guest. It's Mark Irwin. Mark is the man. I've known of Mark forever. I think he got into the comic business a couple of years after I did. And it turned out he actually hired me for a card for Image. And he actually remembered the ridiculous card I drew. So that was pretty funny. We didn't talk about that. We talked about a million other things like surfing, a little more surfing, music, and just tons of amazing stories of his journey from the Pacific Ocean to the Kubert School to heavy metal, Image, and now on to Mad Cave. He's really seen so much and is an amazing guy. So I hope you enjoy this talk as much as I did.
I know I'm at a place now where I actually appreciate being able to get more than, 3 or 4 hours of sleep. I don't get much more than that, but still,
It makes me think of how many times you do this. There's the I'll never drink again thing, but it's also the I'll never do an all-nighter again.
Yeah. I've said that before, and then it ended up not being true. So
yeah, I've stopped saying it just for the fact that I don't want to have to do another one.
Oh yeah, no, I don't ever want to do them again. But sure enough, I started a different thing that caused me to have repeated all-nighters for like 3 weeks in a row. So sometimes you just it's unavoidable in our field.
Yeah, what we take on knowingly or unknowingly in the creative world is so treacherous to our own health and sanity in so many ways.
Very much so. Yeah.
But I've done the thing in the offices. I've done. I just go, boy, I just don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I think for me, where I kind of fell with all of that is that, I wasn't really good at much. Like I knew I was good at, like I learned inking. I became better at it over time. I wasn't even that good when I broke in, but it took me a number of years to feel like I I don't want to say mastered it, but got to a competency level that I was more comfortable with.
Hmm.
Um, but all during that time, all during all 30 years that I was inking, I always had a day job. And the reason I did that was because I was scared. I had kids, I had a mortgage. I was worried about, not like losing my house, not being
Right.
able to feed my kids, all those kinds of things, or health insurance, 401k. You think about all that kind of stuff. And for me, it was just like, well, I guess I got to do both. Because
Hmm.
I gotta scratch that itch, but by the same token, I also have all these responsibilities that I can't shirk.
Well, so what was it for you? Like, what was the thing that you recognized early in yourself that made you say, I want to scratch that itch versus being just a passive enjoyer of whatever the thing you dug?
Um, you know, I think a lot of it was just typical. Um, I had a bad home life. Comics at the time were probably more of an escape for me, but I drew. I was like the guy in high school that drew on his math homework and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And um, when I got out of high school, um, I just I needed a job. I moved out of my parents' home fairly early. I think I just turned 17.
Mm.
Um, Mainly, it was a bad situation, so I just had to get out. Moved in with a buddy of mine, had to have a job, pay for rent, and just started working. And I had always worked. I worked for my stepfather. I always had odd jobs and kind of did a little bit of everything. But when I moved out, I got into construction and landscaping and all that kind of stuff. And
Right.
basically, I did, toiled away at that for a couple of years. And then I met this girl who, was like, she saw that there was potential and that I had ambition, but my ambition was completely aimless. Like I had no real plan. Um, you know, right when I got out of high school, I also tried to be a professional surfer. I surfed on the amateur circuit here in Southern California for about 2.5 years,
Mm.
and was never good enough. I mean, just these guys just would blow me out of the water, and so I was like, okay, that's not what I'm going to be. What am I going to be? And she was like, well, you do like to draw, and I had done a portfolio review and been accepted to the Kubert School
Mm.
um, while I was still in high school. But my parents didn't want me to go to an art school and kind of shut the whole thing down. So she was like, that's what you want to do. That's what you want to be. And the more I thought about it, I was like, well, maybe there's a chance here. So, kind of reached out to them again, was immediately reaccepted, and reached out to an uncle of mine to co-sign for student loans.
Okay.
And they ended up going to the school, and it was hard as hell. My first year of school, I worked full time, stocking shelves in a grocery store just to pay my rent and my tuition and for my supplies and everything. And it was a nightmare. I mean, I was so tired. I barely survived the first year at the Kubert
Oh,
School.
wow.
And she had to come. She had to come back east right near the end of the school year to convince me not to quit. And I stuck with it. And the second year got better, and I started getting work. One thing led to another, and pretty soon I was only doing art for a living rather than
Hmm.
having all of these side things. Because up to
Yeah.
that point, even back there, I was digging ditches for swimming pools, working in grocery stores, all sorts of stupid stuff. So
I mean, the thing is, we have to do whatever it is we have to do to fund this dream of whatever we want to do. Um, so, we're not spring chickens. So, what year were you go? What year did you go off to the Kubert School?
I went in 1992.
Okay.
and graduated in 95.
All right, right on. So yeah, I graduated from SVA in 91. So we're just right. You were there when I was sort of kicking around in New York trying to get my air quote career going. So yeah, Eric Shanauer went to Kubert School, but probably like a decade before I guess
Yeah.
you went. And but the one thing I've picked up on the people who went to Kubert, there was a very strong ethic of go get work.
Yeah, I think there was certainly some of that. I also think Kubert, I think in some ways, probably the curriculum at say SVA or Pratt or maybe even SCAD, was perhaps a little more sophisticated and probably a better, initial curriculum. But what the Kubert School was sort of like you had to figure out for yourself what to do with it. So there was a lot of kids that went. I mean, I know my graduating class, like we always joke, like our graduating class was like the worst in the history of the Kubert School. We always laugh about that, because so many of us we didn't get anything out of it. We either weren't driven enough or we didn't feel like, we got any help or whatever to move on. But there were a few of us that basically took everything we could from every teacher available, every pro that happened to bounce through Dover, New Jersey. You picked their brains. For me, I had come home after my first year. I came home for the summer, working odd jobs along the summer, and went to Comic-Con and met an inker at Comic-Con from New Jersey who thought my lettering samples were halfway decent. My inking samples were terrible, but he said, hey, I can train you up if you want to do backgrounds for me. And when I came back to the school for my second year, I started working with him. He got me my very first paying work, which was a lettering job. I did a couple of lettering jobs all while doing backgrounds for him. And what he would do is I'd do these pages and I'd send them back to him. And then he'd send me new pages, but he'd send me Xeroxes of the old pages with red pencil showing me all the mistakes I made. Those initial pages were basically red. And so, it was a quick learning experience. He was great and patient with me. And then over time, he kind of reached out to other inkers that were also in that same local area. And I started getting pages from those guys. And every guy was different. Some guys would be like, all you do is fill in the blacks. You touch anything else on this page, you'll never work again, And then other guys were like, I don't care what you do. Just bring me back the page finished. I don't care. And
right.
So I would, and it was like a lot of that. So, I picked up brush inking really, really quickly. I was a much better brush inker. I didn't really understand the nib. And started, getting a lot of work from these guys to the point where I didn't have to do anything else and just was doing that. And I kind of made a decision about halfway through my second year that I kept working on penciling. I kept working. I wanted to learn to paint, all of these different things. But I kind of knew at that point, I'm going to be an inker. This is this is like the thing that I'm most comfortable with. This is the thing that I seem to have picked up almost instantly and quickly here at the school because I had never inked before.
Right.
This is like, I felt like I got it really quickly. So
your submission work to the school was pencil work of pages or just general artwork?
It was mostly general artwork.
Okay.
I am literally the most clueless artist of all time. I never took art classes. I never, I I get mad at myself sometimes because I could have known so much more before I went to the school, but I just didn't. I didn't really, I I had How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, but
Yeah.
basically I used that book to try and ape the frontispieces to each chapter that John Buscema was doing. Like I wanted to draw like John Buscema, and
Sure.
but I didn't, I didn't bother like paying attention to the inking stuff or how to lay out a page. It's just like
Right.
be able to draw a Submariner in that pose. Um, not really paying attention to all the extra parts of a page that you're supposed to draw. Um, so really quickly, I kind of figured out that where my strengths were and where my weaknesses were. And it was all like with the Kubert School, like they constantly sort of beat on the drum of not only going out and getting work, but also don't blow deadlines. Always be available.
Hmm.
Do your best work, but do your best work within the time period that you actually have.
Yeah.
Uh, and that was sort of like the driver for me was I just wanted to be fast and I wanted to be competent, and it got me work early on. So,
Oh, for sure. And I mean, that is, it's very strange. My mentor, when I was breaking into the business, just sort of disabused me pretty quickly of the art of the whole thing. He's like, it's not art, it's product. I'm just creating a product that needs to be done. And I'm like, wow, okay, but like I understood that because it was a matter of, style wasn't specific to you. The style was applicable to the story being told. So, because like if you draw happy cartoon stuff, you maybe not be best suited for like the Hulk.
right.
So you would have to sort of change your style to fit the product better. And that was sort of how that lens was the lens I was given. And I'm like, okay, well, that kind of makes sense to me. But you more so than style or coolness or whatever the thing you want to call it, getting your work done on time and competently, that will keep you well employed for a long time.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. I know,
No.
by the time I got to Wildstorm, I was fairly, I don't even know if competent is the right word. I wasn't quite there yet, but I was good enough to fake it
Mm-hmm.
when I first got to Wildstorm. But again, I was a brush guy, and when I came to Wildstorm, everybody was a
Oh yeah.
thinker, and I had to like I couldn't fake it anymore. I was we called it the pit, which was like this room in the middle of the entire offices where we all had desks. All of us interns had desks, and you couldn't hide anymore. Like everybody
Right.
saw the way you were working and what you were doing. Everybody's looking over everybody else's shoulder. So I had to pick up the nib really quick, and I sucked. I didn't even know how that tool worked, and really had to figure it out on the fly. But um, I was surrounded by crazy talent. I mean, Tom McWeeny was there. He was terrific. Tom was actually my mentor for quite a long time at Wildstorm. Scott Williams, Alex Garner, um, just so many really good people. Sandra Hope, Rich Friend, and I would learn from all of them. Like little bits and pieces. I'd see what they were doing, and I'd pick it up and I'd practice. And I was so. I think. I think the thing that people underestimate is being driven. Like
Mm-hmm.
I was crazily driven. I had already had my first kid. Was in major like I got to figure this out or I am screwed. you know,
Right. Right.
fear is a great motivator.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in that place from like 8:30 in the morning till 6, 7 at night every day, just cranking. Then I'd go home and I'd practice more. I mean, and that was when I was still an intern and kind of staying in the apartment. But even after that, when I finally moved out and got my own place and everything, I was still sort of like that, just spending all my time. I was either there or I was working all night at home and, just cranking.
Yeah, it's man, it's so I didn't it totally like escape me, but that whole I mean, you exited, your schooling time right into that sweet spot when, they were in, I guess, La Jolla at that point.
They were in La Jolla, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, like they were like firing on all cylinders, and
They
yeah.
were. It was like maybe sort of 6 to 8 months after the real boom,
Mm-hmm.
when the crazy money was flying around and everything. We were sort of coming down on the backside of that by the
Yeah.
time I got there. And I didn't go there immediately. I mean, when I graduated the Kubert School, I actually worked at Heavy Metal for about a month as their art director.
Oh,
Uh,
cool.
and for those that know me and laugh at my lack of knowledge when it comes to Photoshop or Illustrator or all those things, which is very true. I'm completely a Luddite with that stuff. Back then, being an art director meant that you had to know how to do paste ups and mechanicals. So everything was done by hand. And that's what I did for a month at Heavy Metal. But then I was offered the job at Wildstorm during that time because I had kept, I'd been sending out ink samples and all that kind of
Right.
stuff. So it was a chance to come home for me.
It's so funny. It makes me remember this. This was like 1998, 99. I was in Atlanta. I was teaching at an advertising and design school, and the students were taking my drawing class basically to like pump me for information, like figuring out how to do things. And they would ask me, okay, well, hey, I want to do this thing for my ad piece or whatever it was. I would sit there and I would try to start telling them how to do it by hand, and they would all just glaze over like with fear, going, "What do you?" Because all they were looking at was looking at it from the Photoshop or Illustrator point of view. So yeah, I get that disconnect. It is a very different world.
Yeah,
From the
explaining to somebody Ruby Lith or Xeroxing photos and
Sure,
cutting
yeah,
up a Xerox. People are just like, what? Uh,
yeah,
but it was a good learning experience for me, and and then coming to Wildstorm was an even greater learning experience for me. So, just I like I said, a lot of it was just being driven. It was like there was no failure was something I couldn't, I wasn't ready. There was just no way
yeah.
to fail, so I had to go.
Well,
I had to
your
succeed.
responsive, yeah, your responsibility level was far higher than most everyone around you. I'm assuming because everyone was young, single, and in comics, so there
Right.
was no other thought. Yeah, no, I get it because that's where I was. So I totally get that.
Yeah, it was tough a little bit. I mean, like I look back and I wish I hadn't. I wish I could have been a little less serious
mm-hmm.
and probably a little less. I was certainly prickly because I was so either exhausted or like hyper focused. It was like I couldn't deviate from either one of those things.
Right.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I had my fair share of good times with people, but a lot of my good time having, I had done all of that and sort of gotten it out of my system as a young teenager, uh,
Mm-hmm.
long before I ever got to the Kubert School, let alone, actual work. So,
Well, that energy, that sort of that get it done energy, or the prickly energy. I mean, that is both of those are sort of the same source. They're both the same frenetic kind of source. So it's easy to sort of like that switch can go back and forth between the two because one of them is protecting the other
oh
just so
yeah,
you can accomplish the goal. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, So, okay, I want to hop back to a very important subject, and I'm sure anybody listening is going to roll their eyes, but surfing, because this is important. Um, did you watch any of the sunset stuff?
Yeah.
The surfing. Yeah, I did too. It was I was really hoping that Colapinto was going to pull it out. I was really like rooting for the kid.
Yeah, I'm sort of a John fan.
Oh yeah,
I'm always happy when Slater decides to enter those things and
yeah,
out there,
for sure.
Yeah.
No, my wife is like, his name is Kelly Slater, not Kelly. You don't know him. I'm like, okay, all right. But yeah, I was in California a few years ago, and I had to drive up to Fresno, and it just so happened to kind of take me by where Surf Ranch is. So
Nice.
I went up there and banged on the doors. I'm like, let me in. And they politely,
Appointment there.
yeah, they politely said no and gave me a bunch of stickers and sent me away. But
Well, that's cool.
yeah, no, it was cool. I just like to see I just like to see the machine. Really, that's
Oh, yeah.
where I want to check it out. But yeah, Sunset was great. Pipe was kind of boring. The swells never came for Pipe. It just didn't set up this year. But yeah, Sunset was great, and I'm glad to see how they're layering the women's and the men's
Yeah.
heats. It works out well.
Yeah. And that show that they have on Apple
Yeah,
TV has been awesome. It's been fun to watch,
I think it's going to do what the Drive to Survive for Formula One has done on Netflix for Formula One. Like, people now like know what it is, and now they know who the people are, and they go, I want to watch this.
Right.
And I think that's the same thing with surfing, because these are these individual sports where the people are very far away,
Right.
and and you only get to talk to them while they're soaking wet. That's after the fact.
Right.
So yeah, and I was explaining last night why the greatest surfer, the current greatest surfer in the world, isn't winning every single event. Is because John Florence doesn't have that same need to kill his opponents that Kelly Slater does.
Yeah, Slater was a unique animal, and I remember when he first started competing, and he was just annihilating everybody, and I was not a fan because
No, me
you know
neither.
the guy that I grew up with, the guy that was sort of my guy, the guy that I had posters all over my walls with, was Tom Curran, and
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to surf like Curran. I wanted to be smooth and kind of have that style that he had, and all of a sudden I see this kid who's like jacking up airs and doing like crazy stuff on a wave that I hadn't really seen before. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and then of course he had that rivalry with Rob Machado, who like I see Rob Machado like walking around, like he's here in San Diego, and like the nicest, like mellowest guy, and everything. So like, I was always rooting for Machado too.
Mm-hmm.
But Slater like kind of through being constantly there sort of wore me down. I became a
Yeah.
fan. The guy he's undeniable,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
uh, yeah, you just I'm just impressed by all these guys, to be honest with you. And it's such a different sport. I have so many friends that come to San Diego and they're like, dude, take me out, like give me a lesson or something, and we'll go out. Literally in the first half hour, they're exhausted. They don't understand like why it's so hard. And I'm like, yeah, we should watch these guys. You should watch these guys surf,
Oh yeah. Well, it's a completely different world. I'm not going to leave this as a complete tangent. What do you think what kind of parallels do you think there are between surfing and the career you chose?
Um, sort of I think for me personally, the biggest thing is that sort of you gotta want it thing. When I first started surfing, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And I had a buddy who was a little bit better than me when we started. I caught up to him, at a certain point, but it took years, to get to that
Mm.
place. But he was such a he was such an influence on me. I wanted to surf like him. He introduced me to music that to this day is still my favorite music. Like we really bonded, and he was a good friend. And um, I think the key was like this constant, I got to be up at 4:30 in the morning. I got to be in the water by 5 a.m.
Mm.
I'm going to be there when the sun comes up, and I'm going to catch this many waves, and I'm going to ride half of them backside, which was the weak link in my
Hmm.
surfing. Because I'm not a good backside surfer. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Like it focused me, sort of in a way that I think, due to my, like I said, I had not a great home life. Like between my home life and the fact that I wasn't like the best student either, all of that stuff, like I was definitely had a million things going on in my head all the
Right.
time. I wasn't focused on any one thing. With surfing, it's like you have to be in the moment and you have to focus. And when I started inking, I was I had to be in the moment and I had to
Hmm.
focus. Like every line that I made had to be perfect, or
Yeah.
I had to really concentrate on what my hand was doing. What is the brush doing? What is the nib doing? What is the artist trying to convey with this? Like, am I going to be an overwhelming inker where everybody goes, "Oh, Mark inked that," or am I going to be sort of a chameleon guy that tries to adapt his style to whoever I'm inking? Uh,
Hmm.
I think over the course of my career, I became the latter. I was never like the guy that you would pick up a page and go, "Oh yeah, I know who inked that."
Right.
I was more the guy that you would say, "Oh, that page looks good," and I wonder who inked it.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
I think you nailed it. It's that you need to be completely focused on the thing at the time. And when you started talking about the brush, I was like, oh my God, yeah. I mean, the brush is that balance between, the rail and the edge of the wave. Like that face of the wave and that rail is the same with that brush because it's the pressure, it's the motion, it's is there enough ink? Like all these elements come into play and you can't, you really can't undo it. So you got to work through it.
yeah, yeah.
Huh.
And having flow, like really,
Hmm.
being able to pull longer and longer lines or push longer
Hmm.
lines, figuring out all those things, like took me, forever to get to a place where I felt good about what
Yeah.
I was putting down. But the whole being in the moment was the most important. And I would
Yeah.
say that's the closest parallel between the two things is just
Yeah.
I'm
And the
here.
grit.
Everything is, you're aware of everything around you. You're aware of everything that's happening underneath you, in the water and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And you're focused.
Well, it's it is that, but in the situational awareness, which you just mentioned, like that is that sense, like because you know, only the rare occasions are you alone on the thing that you're doing. If it's skiing, surfing, whatever, there's usually other people around, so you can't just go wailing into people. You have to pay attention, and often there may be a beverage on your drawing table, there may be a bottle of ink, like all these things are there and you can't just ignore them. You have to kind of be aware of that stuff. And so I think they build into that resilience of grit that you were talking about, like, seeing someone who's better than you and putting in, the reps to get to what you think might be equal to or better than them. Like those things are, and in the art realm, that's the same stuff. Okay, super crazy tangent. You just reminded me of something. And I always say to myself, don't talk so much, let them talk. But this one's really good. So around, I guess, 95, 96. So do you know Howard Porter?
Of course. Yeah.
Okay. So Howard and I were buddies and we met at a very small convention and we were fast friends because he's the funniest person in the world and I'm not going to let that go. And we'd be on the phone all the time talking while we're working. And one day I was just complaining about inking, like, because I've always wanted to be better and better with the brush. And how can you do it? And, the ideal position for a brush is absolutely perpendicular to the paper so you can create, the flare perfectly, all this stuff. But of course, that's not how our bodies are built. So what I drew up, and being the son of an engineer was a bonus. My father built what I guess Howard might have called it the Inkomatic. So and it's basically an XY plotter axis. So it was two parallel rods running, perpendicular to each other on linear bearing rails. And then there's a pad in the center. So you could move this thing over artwork in any direction with
Okay.
relative ease. So the idea was that you could then hold the brush right above that over your artwork, and you could move this thing so your hand would, like a ball stick when you're painting. The idea is that this thing would do that. It only made it into the Mark I prototype version because the linear bearings weren't fine enough, and it didn't have that smooth quality. And it was really just a fun thing to do. But Howard loved the Inkomatic. He thought that was the best thing ever. So
Yeah, he's a good guy. He's a good guy.
He's the best. Yeah, everybody who wants to get into comics, become a surfer or a skateboarder, something where you have to fall off the thing and get back on to keep the grit going.
Yeah, I always my hair was down to my butt. I was like metalhead surfer guy who just sort of fell into comics. And it certainly was I liked the freedom of all of that. For me it was always about never going to wear a suit. I'm never going to be some corporate guy. I'm always going to be who I am, and not let any of that go. And in some ways that did hurt me, over time. Definitely cost me opportunities. But at the same time, I would say that for the most part, I've never really had to compromise that stuff, despite the fact that I am technically, quote unquote, a company man now. I definitely have learned a lot along the way, but finding a way to balance those aspects of your personality has been pretty good. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the thing that I think we also learn is that we can't just die on the hill of idealism. Like, we have to know what is the thing that we really like. Is this still working? Am I benefiting from this, or am I just doing this because I said I would do it? Like, there's a point when you have to go, all right, let me revise my plan here.
Well, you have to also know, like, if I'm standing on that hill, is it the right hill? Is standing on this hill going to cost me in ways that I can't imagine or don't know? I certainly have seen it. I've done it myself where, you're fighting a needless battle, a battle that doesn't really need to be fought because nobody cares. Nobody cares.
Right.
Nobody cares
totally.
what that particular, smaller ideal was. And all you're doing is hurting yourself by screaming from the treetops and nobody's paying attention. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
So you said your buddy turned you on to music that's still your favorite music today. Is it anything to do with that black thing up rectangle on your shelf with the gentleman standing in front of the pentagram?
Yeah, it could be that.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I was actually a big, I loved Iron Maiden. I loved
Sure.
I was into Judas Priest. I was into metal and hard rock and, all that kind of stuff. And I already liked Rush. Like, they were a band amongst many that I enjoyed. But I also wasn't like, I didn't come from a place where, my whole musical, library came from the radio. So I listened to like the local rock station in San Diego, and that's what I grew up on.
Yeah.
We didn't have a lot of money, so there wasn't like constant, albums, coming in or anything like that. So this guy that taught me to surf, he had me over. I used to walk home with him, and we'd walk to his place because his mom would feed me, which was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd come over and we'd go into his room, and possibly some, substances were ingested at the time. And he
You
had
mean like Cheerios?
yeah, Cheerios. Yeah. Because his mom fed me.
Yeah.
He had headphones and he had a stereo. And I come over one day and he's like, I just found this. You got to hear this album. His older brother had given it to him, and it was an album called Caress of Steel, which is Rush's third album. And it's like literally probably the least appreciated of Rush's albums,
Okay.
because it's heavy. It's like you would not expect it coming from this band, like especially the way people envision Rush today. It's heavy. It's metallic in spots even. And it's got like two huge, very long, epic stories on it. One side of the album is an entire song. But sitting there with the headphones on and hearing it pan from ear to ear and all that kind of stuff, it blew my mind. I could not believe how incredible it was. And it set me off on a path that I still haven't gotten off of yet, much to the chagrin of my wife and and other friends of mine. But yeah,
it's oh man, it is blessed are the older siblings, for they open the doors, sonically and and literally and filmically in so many ways to so many people. Yeah, I mean, mine and then my friends' older siblings, it was just always, we're pilfering their stuff to see what was cool. Kiss albums in the 70s.
yeah,
that wasn't our discovery, that was their discovery. We got it from them.
yeah. I mean, when Kiss was huge in the mid '70s, I remember I didn't know anything about them outside of what they look like. I had a friend who lived across the street who had Kiss toys, and that's all I knew about them, because they didn't play Kiss on the radio, but they played Stevie Wonder and they played Heart and they played, Al Green and stuff like that. So my musical, education was all over the place. It was basically whatever they played on the radio, and that's I still like a lot of that same stuff. I mean, I'd like to think I'm more open-minded as I've gotten older. I used to be really closed-minded about music. I've gotten better as I've gotten older, but I still like what I like.
Wait, hold the presses here. Are we saying that a Rush fan is a bit closed-minded to other music? I'm just throwing it out there.
I would say more as a rock and metal fan. I have definitely been known to be closed-minded in regards to pop music. I am definitely, yeah. But I having two daughters will slowly cure you of that.
Sure, for sure. Yeah, no, I have a very strong belief that there's this point where when we hit about 12 years old, things lock into us and that's always going to make us happy. Whatever that was will always bring joy to us moving forward. And it's not that we can't acquire more things that we dig. There are plenty of bands that appeared after the age of 12 for me, but Cheap Trick is always going to be a favorite band. The Police are always going to be a favorite band. Like, these are just bands that will just kind of live in my spirit forever.
I love them both. That always consider myself lucky to have seen so many of these bands live too. Just going to concerts. I had an uncle who's like this hippie, and he took me to see Heart when I was like 8 or 9 years old. That was my first concert.
Wow.
And I remember, I can't remember the concert all that well. What I remember the most is that he had to take all his, he had like, he was a liquor salesman. So he
Hmm.
had like a bazillion business cards on him at all times. And he had to give me both stacks of his business cards to put over my ears because I couldn't believe how loud it was, you know? And yeah, it was, that was my first concert experience. But,
Oh, that's amazing.
I was hooked. I loved seeing live music. I still go to like death metal shows, like I'm committed,
Well, you also live in I mean, San Diego is a great venue town. Like everybody goes to San Diego to play, so you're going to see all the great bands.
Yeah, they come to LA a little more. Like a lot of the bigger acts will skip San Diego, but you know, th- there's definitely a good mix here. And then we have there's an actual metal club, like bar here. So a lot of like the not necessarily Metallica, obviously, but like the smaller, less known bands, will tour and they'll play at this place, and it's like a hall. I mean, it's really tiny, and
Oh, that's great.
go in there and get a beer and watch great metal. So
That's so cool. Yeah, live music. It's some of the best stuff. So you're working at Wildstorm. I mean, you were kind of are in the epicenter of the cool of what was happening in comics in the 90s, because working for Marvel or DC, they were working looking over their shoulder. They were going like, what are those guys doing? Like that whole West Coast thing that was happening in the 90s really changed comic books in so many ways.
oh yeah, it was a good time. I mean, when I came to Wildstorm, I was a little bit older than all the other interns. Like I said, I'd already had my first kid, was sort of like this focused, responsible guy, but you couldn't help but be infected by all the youth and the excitement about stuff around you. And when I got there, I mean, my influences were John Buscema, Bernie Wrightson. I still worship at Bernie's altar.
Mm.
Mike Mignola, like those were the people that I loved, and I didn't really know anything about this Jim Lee guy or Mark
Right.
or any of that kind of stuff. And so it was a good education for me, like kind of getting up to speed with all that stuff. The other great thing about Wildstorm was that when I got there, I was fresh out of heavy metal. I'd been at heavy metal for like a month, but I had that title on my resume that I was
Sure.
an art director of heavy metal. So after about a month or two at Wildstorm, I'd been an intern. I was working in we called it the pit, and I was doing trading cards and box art and pinups for different publications and stuff. Wildstorm had their own consumer products department, and that department was run by Ted Adams.
Mm-hmm.
Started IDW, and they needed an art director. And he basically, him and a guy named Chris Briscoe,
Mm-hmm.
came and sort of plucked me out of the pit and said, "You're the art director of consumer products." So it was really that was really good for me. I came over there, started hiring like literally the creme de la creme of artists back then. That's where
Yep.
I met. That's when I started and became friends with Andrew Robinson and Dave Johnson and Dan Panosian, three
Mm-hmm.
guys I still consider my very dear friends to this day. Started working with the Gaijin guys and Artemis Studios, like all these guys that were in like the sort of South,
Yeah.
I started hooking up with a lot of those guys and having conversations till like 4 o'clock in the morning about Mike Mignola with Doug Alexander is still a great memory of mine, and Doug's the cinematic director for Diablo now, just getting all those connections with all these artists like that I'd never really had before. Because at
Mm-hmm.
Wildstorm, you're inking Wildstorm people. We're all in the same office. We're all in the same building. Um, you know, my bachelor party, for instance, Travis Sherray was at my bachelor party, Jeff Campbell was at my bachelor party, Jim Lee was at my bachelor party. Like we were all in the same room, so to speak.
Yeah.
But now through the consumer products department, all of a sudden I'm talking to people like Adam Hughes, like I'm talking to Brian Stelfreeze and people like that. And really starting to get like a bigger picture of comics as a whole, rather than solely being in that image, kind of
Yeah.
explosion only. So it was a good way for me to sort of learn.
Yeah, that's it's interesting because I guess that is around. So we'll want to give you credit in this one though, but that was a time when Dave started doing work for Wildcats,
Yeah.
so that is around the time where I think Jim, at least I'm hypothesizing that Jim seemed to feel much more comfortable with what he had established, and then now he could bring in, rather than it being just a pure visual extension of what he did, it was now I want to bring in stuff that I think is really cool, or other people in the studio think is really cool, because that's because Dave and I were buddies back then, and I remember Dave, I think like he got like work because somebody was looking for to hire Travis, and they called up Dave, and they were because Dave had done a Wildcats comic, and Dave's like, "Oh, you did this. We want you to do something." And Dave's like, "Sure, no problem." But they were referring to Travis's comic, and David's like, "I'm not." He's like, "I'm not going to tell them otherwise. I'm just going to do it." So
Yeah.
but it was that period, and that's when Travis was kind of really shifting into his own sort of, style was coming out stronger.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really kind of pivotal moment for, and up at Top Cow, Brandon was really kind of setting
Oh,
a
yeah.
new standard
Yeah.
visually, and I think that kind of all follows, maybe, because Eric had hired Dave to do Super Patriot, and that predates all that, and that was a huge hit.
Yeah, I think Super Patriot might have been right before the Wildcats stuff, and the Super
Yeah.
Patriot stuff was amazing. And then Dave, comes and does Wildcats, and I'm pretty sure he was inked by Kevin Nolan on that stuff, so it was
That's
even more
right. That's
fantastic.
sure.
Yeah, Travis was doing his thing; it was amazing. I loved Brando's, Spawn Witchblade stuff was
Oh
just
yeah.
ridiculous. I mean, it was like wherever you turned with the Image guys, there was always somebody doing something really great. I know it was friendly, but we all, it was a rivalry for sure.
Mm,
There was rivalry between the Inkers, our group of Inkers and the guys at Top Cow, the
right.
guys, I should say guys and girls, because there were so many,
Sure.
of us that were just kind of looking at what everybody else was doing, like kind of going,
Mm,
oh, that D-Tron guy over at Top Cow, wow, that stuff's amazing. And then you'd see what Tim Townsend was doing at Extreme, and oh, that's
mm,
amazing. And I became friends with Tim and Dan Panosian. Like that was probably my first month. I had just joined Wildstorm, and both those guys came walking in. And it was hilarious. I had long hair, both of them had long hair, and unlike me, I was like a skinny, like super skinny, like fit surfer guy.
right.
These two guys come in, and Tim looked like Thor, Dan looked like
Yep.
Conan. That they're both so muscled up and everything, but they watched me ink, and they both like were giving me all this encouragement and clapping me on the back, the whole 9 yards. And it was just like, oh, I love these guys. They
Yeah.
were they were such they were so
Warm.
really great, yeah, warm and cheerleadery, and that. So there was a lot of that. So many people from other studios would kind of come, like Jim would have, like holiday parties, and other people from other studios would come down from LA or wherever and join us, and it was good times.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I guess they were heady times, to say the least.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you like, how do you frame it? Like, you're in the middle of this kind of stuff happening. You're inking, you know, you're paying bills, you're kind of doing the thing that you, I guess, identified as the, next to surfing. This is the thing that gives you that satisfaction. Did you have, because now I guess you moved over with Chris and, um, did
Ted.
you have like, yeah, and Ted, did you have like a vision at that point? Like, were you going, okay, here's where I am, this is where I'm going to continue with, or did you think bigger, or did you want to get back to monthlies? I mean, how did you like?
It was weird. When I joined the consumer products group, I was the art director, and I was also in charge of the new intern group that I actually, with Ted and Chris, interviewed and brought in. So it was like Carlos Dianda and Ali Garza and Lee Bermejo and Ryan Otogawa. And actually, Ryan was before that. Ryan was part of my group of interns. But we had like this second wave of interns that kind of came in, and it was a little different. I was only like a couple of years older than these guys, but I was in charge of them, and they all wanted to party and kind of, enjoy the whole thing. And I was like much more like, well, we got work to do. We gotta get this. We have deadlines and, stuff like that. And what ended up happening was, I was art directing trading card sets. I was editing our trade. We had started a trade program, so we were starting to collect like Travis's
Right.
wildcats issues, into a book and all that kind of stuff. And I was doing that stuff. And then I was also doing like even a little bit of writing. Like I was writing some of the card backs and things like that. So I was getting like this good education and all this stuff. Everything from making T-shirts and Frisbees to making trading cards, all these different things. So it was a good learning experience for me. But what was great, really great about it was that I still was inking as well. And what was great about that, being in that position, was that all of a sudden I was working on projects where the editor didn't need 6 pages tomorrow.
Uh-huh.
I was all of a sudden given time. The very first project I remember really vividly is the Spawn movie adaptation, which we did at Wildstorm. And I was inking Carlos Dianda on that. And it was the first time that I ever felt like I kind of had time and had a better understanding of what I needed to do as an inker. And Carlos, he always kind of poo-poos this now, but he was a great help for that, because he would come in, he'd stand over my shoulder while I was inking pages.
Oh, wow.
Don't do that, do this, and like it was good for me. So I really like kind of cut my teeth inking Carlos. Then we moved on to Resident Evil. We did like Resident Evil comic magazine, and then I ended up inking him and Lee Bermejo and Ryan Otogawa. And all three of them are very, very different, have very, very different styles. So it was a really good chance for me to sort of get better and really with what I could do. And along the way, during that time period too, we were just doing tons of trading cards. So I would be inking like half of those, and just really it made me a much better inker. So when sort of things started to go south at Wildstorm, and Jim had to sell to DC, DC came in, and I remember, like Paul Levitz, like he called each one of us into an office and kind of gave us the news of, what was happening either with our position or whether we were going to be retained or, whatever. And when I came in, he's like, obviously we're shutting down the consumer products group because DC has
Right.
there's no reason for us to have another one. He's all, but we like your inks, and we think you're a good inker, and we'll still give you work. And I was like, okay, I figured, okay, well, I'll just go to being a full-time inker. And at this point, I started to really feel strongly about that too. Like I was like, oh,
Hmm.
I'm really figuring this out, and I think I'm a good inker, and all this kind of stuff. And that turned out to not completely be true. Basically, DC took over. A lot of the books that I was working on got canceled or shut down. So all of a sudden, I went from making a fairly solid income, for my family, to making
Yeah.
like nothing, and it was pretty quick. I mean, it happened in like a month and a half or so. Like it was just like, what is happening around me?
Oh.
Um, but thankfully, by that point, Ted and Chris had started IDW. Um, those guys were my best friends at the time.
Hmm.
Especially Chris and I were like drinking buddies and just developed a really great friendship. He's a big music head too, and he exposed me to music that I'd never listened to before, and it was like we had like a really good relationship in that way. He was constantly turning me on to new stuff, and um, they were developing games for Upper Deck, the trading card company.
Yeah. Right. Right.
And this is right at the very inception of Upper Deck's entertainment group. And Upper Deck was like trying to figure out like how do we actually have an entertainment group. So Ted recommended to them that they hire me. We got to hire this guy Mark Irwin because he's sort of like a jack of all trades, and all the things that you guys need, he can help you with, whether
Uh-huh.
it's art direction or project management or even ideation for new games and all that kind of stuff. Mark knows what he's doing. Like, you guys need a guy like him in here. So I got hired at Upper Deck, and I was there for 10 years,
Wow.
and sort of I did everything, like whether it was creating a consumer gaming program, so that when you went to like your local Toys R Us, they had organized play for Yu-Gi-Oh or, you know,
Hmm.
and I did that. I did translation of Yu-Gi-Oh cards. I'd go over to Japan and work with the Japanese guys to translate their game into English, um, and then art direction. The versus system game. That all that I did all that art direction, and made toys. I have toys here in this office that I was lucky enough to art direct. It was a good. It was really, really good education for me. Just learning how to
Well,
do a lot of different things.
one thing that I'm picking up just talking through this is that things that happened, getting the red pencil marks on the copies back of like, hey, here are all your mistakes, or having the artist stand over your shoulder and tell you how to ink it. Like, these are things that, like, with a lot of people, would send them packing. They'd be like, fuck this, fuck you, I'm out of here. And that there's a specific ability to not personalize it in the moment. You can look back at it and go like, what the hell, but at the time you don't personalize it, and you can kind of work your way through it. But what do you think, for you were at this place at 10 years doing what, if 5 years before you'd have been like, I wouldn't have no idea what I was doing if someone said do this job. So I mean, that's a significant kind of like adventure for you to kind of say, okay, I'm going to do this. And what do you attribute to your capability of doing that?
Um, well, I think I attributed a number of factors to it. One, I'm incredibly lucky and thankful that I
I
had.
thought you were going to say handsome.
No, no. Incredibly lucky and thankful that I had a lot of really good mentors, like people that were willing to take the time to show me
Mm-hmm.
things I didn't know how to do. The other thing, too, was that um, the fact that I had broken in sort of as an artist in 95. that and all of the stuff that I worked on and that was published and that had my name on it, that went a long way toward legitimizing me as an art director. So,
Mm.
when I called Steve Rude, Steve Rude, I'd love you to do some trading cards for me. And, Steve's a different guy, like
He's a challenging personality.
he's well, not he's super sweet and really
Yep.
nice. He's just, you have to know how to talk to him.
Yep.
And I remember the first time I called him and asked him to do trading cards, he was like, "Well, Mark, I'd really like you to lay out those 3 cards for me and just, fax that to me in a day or two. And then I'll get back to you with what I think if I'm going to do this." And I'm like, okay. And then I hang up and I'm like, why am I doing a layout for freaking Steve Rude, who's one of the greatest artists of all time? Like, well, who am I to be doing this? And man, I did like stick figure layouts because I was like, I am in no way going to be telling Steve Rude how to do these cards. And he, to his credit, he didn't make me feel like an idiot. Like he took those layouts and he worked from the layouts and he was totally fine with it. And he did great work. And, and he ended up being like just such a lovely human being to work with. But, like you get thrust into those situations and you have to rely on sort of what you know. And I knew what I didn't know. And I knew what I was comfortable talking about. And I always felt like I could talk to other artists. I may not be, I may not be able to, I may not be capable of doing what they can do. That's what makes them them and makes them great. But I certainly could talk the talk. I could say, like, hey, I got your rough back. I think if we switch the lighting to, this direction, I'd love to see that because that'll bring more focus to the character's face. This is going to be on a tiny little trading card, and this is why we want it to look like this. And they could get that. And it wasn't like I was some jackass who doesn't know anything about art telling them what to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you don't, and you try to avoid those situations, right? I would get prickly and angry at Upper Deck when I'd be in meetings with guys that were game designers that didn't know anything about the art, and they'd be bitching and moaning about the artists that I hired for whatever. And I'd be like, this is why I hired this artist. This artist is willing to do all those boring cards that nobody else cares about. But when I call Dave Johnson or Joe Jusko or Steve Rude, they always want Captain America or they always want Spider-Man. You only gave me like 3 Spider-Man cards in this entire 300 card set. All the rest of the cards are thugs and backgrounds. Well, that's why I had to hire this artist because this artist is willing to do all of that. And they do a really good job with it. So it's not like the quality of the work overall for the card set goes down. This guy's still good. He's just not your cup of tea because he's not the name that you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd get all enraged in those meetings, because it's like, who are you to tell me who I should hire,
Right.
But you learn over time to, like, I have certainly mellowed. I am not that guy anymore. And I can laugh about it now, but it was a good learning experience, it was a really good learning experience, understanding how other people that are not artists think and understanding like sort of what the wants and needs are of the project and just trying to find ways to, as things go, try to keep everybody at least reasonably happy. You're not always going to make everybody happy, but you got to do your best to kind of keep everybody in this cohesive sort of happiness till you get to the end, because you're all trying for the same thing. You want the project to be successful and you all want to make money doing it. And you want to be happy with the end result,
Totally. The 2 things I'm thinking about is working on the cards kind of goes back to that surfing thing about the reps. Like doing one comic book a month is a ton of work,
Mm,
but the volume of cards that you have to do in a month is much higher.
yeah.
And you're not doing it with one person, you're doing it with a variety of people. So your interpersonality connections with all these people, like dealing with Joe Jusko and dealing with Steve Root, et cetera, and so forth, you're getting a lot of skill sets because not all of them react exactly the same way when you pick up the phone.
Right.
So I, and the other thing is that we spend a lot of time thinking about like, okay, what's the things I want to do? But the real magic in being able to do the things that we want to do is the capability of communicating clearly to the people who are the ones who are going to say yes and no. Because you may have the greatest idea, but if you can't put it down on paper and say, hey, here's what we want to do, they're going to go, no, we're going to move on to the thing that we can understand. And the more you can make it clear and understandable to the people who can say yes or no, who don't have all the sort of understanding, the clearer that thing is going to end up being to the people who are the fans and consumers of that product.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So I think, you know, being able to do these cards at a high volume and in these timelines, I think you probably build up a lot of skill sets way quicker.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly was a big part of it. A lot of the cards I'd end up inking because whoever I was talking to would say, "Hey, why don't you ink a few?" That's how
Mm-hmm.
I ended up inking Mike Wieringo, was because Mike he was like, "Sure, why don't you ink it?" And I was like, "Really? Okay,
Hey, you got to use your brush.
Yeah, yeah. It was super intimidating, and then I ended up doing a IDW cover over him that was actually a lot more fun, and I felt like I kind of finally figured it out, like what he was looking for. The first couple of trading cards, I did not feel that way, um, but yeah, like you pick up all these skill sets along the way. I was also inking at night. I would leave, I'd go home from Upper Deck and I'd ink at night. I was inking, books for DC and Marvel at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and Dark Horse, and all those guys are different too, and so you're just figuring stuff out along the way. And when Upper Deck sort of imploded in 2010 and laid off like 2/3 of the company, I was already in good shape to like not allow it to affect me too much. I was inking, I think 2 or 3 books full time, monthlies for Marvel and
Yeah.
DC and Dark Horse. And then it allowed me to take all that skill set that I'd picked up over those previous 15 years and start my own consumer products, sort of not really consumer products, but more like creative services
Mm-hmm.
company. We started doing video game, like 2D video game design and all sorts of like weird, like one-off projects and stuff like that. Had a couple of retainer clients, all that sort of thing.
That's cool.
Yeah, and then in 2016, I sort of got headhunted off of LinkedIn, and was asked to join a company in Northern California, a book publishing company that
Hmm.
did big, beautiful coffee table books, and they wanted to start their own comics division. And they asked me to run it. So I moved up to Northern California and did that, for 4 years. And that was a great experience because I'd never done a coffee table book before, and got a chance to do some of those too. So yeah, you just, I think the key is like, it's really easy to look at your own resume or your own education and say, I only know how to do these 4 things.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to be brave though, and be able to say, I know that doesn't completely align exactly with what this piece of paper says I know.
Right.
I bet you I could figure that out.
Yeah.
I bet you I could handle that. I don't think that would be
Yeah.
that big of a deal to handle. Um, and then you jump into it, and maybe it is a big deal to handle. Maybe it is hard,
Sure.
but you plug away, and you find ways to make it work for you, and that's sort of. I feel like that's the story of my career in a nutshell.
Well,
Is
no, that's
plugging
dude.
away.
That's the thing. That I mean, the rule is always say yes. When you're asked, and you go, yes, of course I can do that, and then you have to figure it out how to do it. In the '90s, it was phone calls. I mean, you would just call everybody under the sun and say, "Do you know how to do this?" They go, "No, but I think so and so does," and you get their number, and then you call that person. And now it's the internet, but that was the whole. That was everything. We
Oh yeah,
only could figure it out through that approach. And when I was teaching at that school, by the way, that school that I was teaching at, I got that job because Dave Johnson was teaching at that school. He had separated from his wife and he didn't want to teach anywhere at that school anymore. So he's like, "Would you sub for me?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So I ended up taking his class over. But they then asked me to start teaching ad classes. And I'm like, I don't know. Listen, I draw people in suits and fighting each other. I have no idea about ads. But I just, teaching those classes where the kids were asking me how to do stuff, I realized in that I had a process. I didn't know I had a process, but my process was there was a problem put in front of me. How do I solve this problem? And it was the same sort of mental geometry that I would go through to get to a solution. And that allowed me to say yes to so many more things moving forward because my resume was draw comics.
right.
But that was it. Like there was nothing else. And being able to take that apart and say, "Oh, wait a minute, I can solve another problem rather than just how to tell a story visually on paper with a pencil."
Right. Yeah. When I was
Yeah.
I was doing paste ups and mechanicals, and literally that's a class that you take in the second year at the Kubert School.
Mm.
You know, I had forgotten everything I learned in that class. It was the most boring class
Sure.
ever. Like I didn't enjoy that at all. But all of a sudden I'm at heavy metal and I have to do it. Like I'm not going to make they're going to fire me in like 2 days when they figure out I don't know how to do this. So I was like literally in the Xerox room in these little tiny offices on the phone with one of my teachers from the Kubert School, having him like literally walking me through how to do exactly what I needed to do.
Yeah.
And, thank God he was willing to pick up the phone. But I mean, I was,
Sure.
panic stricken. I was on the phone with him every day for like the first week I was there. Just like, I don't know how to do this. What
Mm.
do I do here? And he would kind of walk me through it. And, yeah. And that was at a time too. Like it's hard for people to imagine this, but there was a time before computers. And, right when I came to heavy metal, one of the things that they tasked me with was installing computers into the offices.
Nice.
I was like, I can do that, and in my head, I'm like, I don't know how to do it. And so, I had one of my tasks was making this book, and I'm setting up the computers. Then I'd spend a couple hours in the office, like in the Xerox office, like taking care of the photos for this book. Then going back into my office to set up Quark, which I didn't know how to
Yeah.
do, and I'm on the phone with customer support for Quark,
Yeah.
and walk through that. Then going back and like messing with these photos, then shooting the photos, and then having to install it all into Quark, and then having to put out a zip disk. Then
Mm-hmm.
having to actually leave the offices and run like 8 blocks to the place that processed zip disks.
Right.
And people don't like understand, but one zip disk was one page of this book.
Yeah.
And the book ended, it was like a couple hundred pages, and you're, I mean, I look back now and I'm like, I can't believe I did that, like
Yeah.
part of you is just like, were things really that hard? But they were, and
Right. But you were like in a science fiction story working with computers and zip drives, because 2 years before that you were just inking something or drawing something in a class.
Right.
So like
Right.
it's, I mean, like, I think we have a hard time remembering, like, we're always living in the apex of civilization. So, like that moment, you were working for NASA, baby. Like it was cutting edge. Um, wow, yeah. And then 20 years later, you're overseeing layouts and paste ups for coffee table books.
Yeah. I mean, when I joined Insight, that was in its own way another crash course.
Mm-hmm.
Because they had a design group and they had a marketing team and a sales team and all that, but all three of those divisions of the company were completely unfamiliar with what comics were and how to make
Sure.
them. So you know sitting with the art director of Insight, who is a brilliant art director. I mean, she makes beautiful books, but she didn't really understand what I thought, you know, comics needed to be or whatever. And we did
Mm-hmm.
graphic novels. We didn't do floppies. So I would sit there and I want the spine to look like this, and it needs to be this size, and this is what we're going for. And, we're going to make all the books look like this. So when you line them up on a shelf, you can tell that that's
Yeah.
our library, and things like that. And, so going from there and then also curating all the content, acquiring the content, working with those creators editorially, um, while also trying to teach the marketing team, like, here's how you market a comic book, which is very
Right.
different than book marketing.
Yep.
Teaching the sales group, yes, there's this company called Diamond, and you really need to talk to them, like things like that. And it was a good crash course for me on how to be. I mean, thank God I had a assistant editor who she was brilliant, and she really helped me stay organized, because I was sort of like this macro thinker that felt like I had to do all of these different things.
Yeah.
And she was the one that was like, let's stay on task. Today we have to get these 6 things done. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, I totally forgot about those 6 things. Back on that, And, but it was a good crash course for me in how to build an imprint, how to understand like the different moving parts, how to understand the book trade, which is very different than the comics trade, which I was so used to. All of that kind of stuff, and that allowed me to move on. In my next two jobs, really, because I went from there to IDW. I was only at
Mm-hmm.
IDW briefly, but I had like a totally different kind of job there. And I learned a lot there in the brief time I was there, and took all of that knowledge, and that got me here, like where I am now. And this is the best job I've ever had, and I'm really, really happy, and I'm doing all the things I've always dreamed about doing.
Yeah.
Um, but even parts of that I'm still learning, I mean, I'm 53 years old, and I'm like, every day is like a new cool thing to learn and be excited about and do. So,
It's kind of cool that, like, we can be joyfully frustrated and not knowing something, and and engage with it to learn it and to get some sort of agency over it, or whatever the term you want to use, at this age, rather than just, I, it would be tough to be just like pulling a lever and pushing a button and pulling a lever and pushing a button. I think having a bit more variety is good. So how did Mad Cave come into your life?
well, I was at IDW, and IDW was going through a lot of changes. I had been hired by a couple of people, one of whom was gone 2 weeks after I got there.
Mm.
The other one who was gone like 5 months after I got there. I was brought in ostensibly to do a certain thing that I had shown I was pretty good at, which was making music related graphic novels.
Mm.
They wanted to start a division there doing that sort of thing. And, I'd done a couple that had won Eisners, so like they were like, we need this guy. And they were friends of mine too. So they like kept after me and finally got me to join IDW. And then, all of a sudden they were both gone, and my job sort of changed, and I sort of became a little bit of a number of things. But one of the things was sort of Axeman, for like, they had me get rid of a whole division.
Oh, wow.
Over time, that was making money, but it was also sort of struggling in different ways, and it was something that they didn't want to really deal with. So going through that process, and then as soon as I had done that, and I did it actually in a way that was quite profitable to IDW rather than the way they initially wanted me to, which would have lost the company quite a bit of money. They let me go. Like and I'm usually I've been around for a long time, so I can feel it when it feels like things are going that direction. I was totally caught unawares. I did not expect it. I was like, I had just made the company a bunch of money. I figured I was in good shape. So when it happened, I was like, whoa, what am I going to do? And, my wife, to her credit, we had just bought a house. We had just moved back to San Diego. We were super excited to be here and all this stuff. And all of a sudden I'm jobless. And I was like, so I came out, it was like 9:00, 9:30 in the morning. And I said, hey, I just got laid off. And I was sort of at a loss. I didn't know what to do. And she goes, go surf. She goes, go surf. When you come back, you'll know what to do. And I was like, okay. So I went and surfed for like 3 or 4 hours, came back, totally better frame of mind, and made, sent some emails out, made a couple calls, and a friend of mine who I'd worked with at Insight, she suggested I reach out to Mad Cave, and she said, I think they're looking to grow, and it might be a good opportunity for you. I had never heard of them. I didn't know who they were or what they were.
Right.
I was like, okay, it won't hurt. So I sent it off, and the owner of the company called me, and we ended up having like a great long discussion. I was still a bit hesitant because, like I said, I didn't know who they were. Comic companies, for better or for worse, there's a lot of fly-by-night companies in our industry.
Yeah.
And the one thing I knew at that point in my life, the one knowledge thing that I actually picked up over all that time in my career, was that I wanted to be in a place where if I was dealing with creators, I wanted to be 100% knowing that we weren't going to screw them over, that our contracts were transparent, that they were going to like the terms of the contract, that we weren't trying to take advantage of them, that we were supporting them, and that we were wanting our best, foot forward with creators and all that kind of stuff. I knew that. That was like the one thing I knew. And the owner of the company was a creator himself, and he felt the same way. And, they offered me the job, like, I think 2 days after he and I talked.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was working like a week and a half later. So
damn.
Yeah.
That's
really
amazing.
It worked out. I'm very, very thankful for it. And honestly, it's gotten better. Like every month has been better than the last since I've gotten here. So
I think what you said, excuse me, about the that transparency, I feel so deeply that because there are so many players in the business, that the greatest value anyone can offer, if they're not, to break into this business, is to be transparent, is to be clear and honest with the people who are doing the hard labor for these projects, because that's all everyone wants. They just want to know that this isn't some sort of get rich quick scheme, like, hey, we're going to strike it big, and because I don't know, is that happening? Is it going to happen? We don't know. Like, there's no way to predict that. What you can do is do the best work possible, and the best work usually gets the attention.
No, I'd been at a previous company that did the whole we pay everybody in 15 minutes or 15 days. Then
Yeah.
then it became, oh, we pay everybody in 30 days. Then it became, oh, we pay everybody in 90 days. Then it became, oh, we pay everybody in 108, and
Right.
I was working there and I was the art director. So guess who was getting
Phone
every,
calls.
yeah, it wasn't our accounts payable department. It was me.
Yeah.
And, and I knew very like from the very beginning, I was like, I'm never going to avoid a call. I'm not going to, I won't avoid people. I'm going to answer people, as directly as I can. I'm a pretty blunt guy and I'm a pretty, which sees what you get. Like I don't have the brain power or the, or the energy to, try and, bullshit people. And,
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I would be the guy that had to deal with all those upset freelancers and all that kind of stuff. And it drained me, it was
Yeah.
horrible. And that went on for a good period of time. I mean, that was like 3 or 4 years of my time there.
Yeah.
And I was just like, never again am I going to do that. It feels terrible. And then I'd been with companies since then that didn't do that necessarily, but would do things like not send out royalty reports and not tell people how many copies the book sold, and then try and
Right.
onto the rights of a book that they didn't even bother trying to ever get out into press, and things like that. And you start seeing like all the different ways that these bigger companies have figured out how to take advantage of the people that are doing the thing that makes you go. Like
Yeah.
that company doesn't go if you don't put out that product, and you're taking advantage of the people that make the product. So like it just blows my
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah.
Uh, so I'm very cognizant of things like that, and I I mean, you had a guest on, a very good friend of mine, who he and I together went through an experience of, it was both the greatest experience and the worst experience all in one. Um,
Ouch.
yeah. And, same thing. I mean, we can commiserate about it a little bit today, but it still hurts because we
Yep.
poured our heart and soul into something, and more so him than I, but he was really heavily taken advantage of. And, it's just, you hate seeing that. That kind of stuff should never happen. So that was a big like selling point for Mad Cave with me, was sort of getting some internal guarantees that we don't and we never will operate in
Yeah.
that. So
That's great. That's really good. So, how do you get your creative juice flowing?
in a variety of ways, I'm really thankful for Mad Cave in that they've sort of put me in a position where I'm both running at, most of the aspects of the business, but also getting opportunities to be creative. I still get to, suggest people for covers. I still,
Cool.
I have a story that I wrote that I never quite finished. It was something I worked on kind of on and off for years and just never got to a point of finishing it. And I gave it to Mad Cave, and now it's being like taken and built into the thing that I envisioned by a different writer. But it's really great because I'm
Oh,
getting to see it
wow.
and everything. And it's like, oh yeah, that was my idea. And he took that and ran with it. And it's even cooler than I thought it could be. So yeah, I get those things. I've done a couple books. I've sort of moved more into writing. So like I wrote a Motorhead graphic novel. Uh, I've done like little stories for people here and there. I got to do a creeper story for DC like
Oh,
a couple.
sweet.
That was super fun for me. I love that character, and I
Yeah.
got to work with an amazing artist in Kyle Hotz. So yeah, like I definitely have found opportunities. Maybe it's not quite the same as the heavy duty roller coaster I was on for so long.
Yeah.
Um, but in many ways, it's also like this completely new challenge. I mean,
Hmm.
we bought a company last year, and I I did that. Like I was the guy that negotiated that deal and did all those things. So that's like a whole different way of thinking and
Yep.
understanding and panicking because it's not your money
Yeah.
and like all that kind of stuff. So it's been tremendous, and I
Oh, wow.
couldn't be happier. So
Yeah, I mean, it is amazing the two things, and if you can just keep challenging yourself intellectually and professionally, this is the kind of stuff that makes you get up, at 4 in the morning and go straight to the waves or whatever the thing it is. If you're getting up early and you're charging towards that thing, that's the right thing. It's
yeah,
if anybody like teases something out of this, it is, search for that thing that you have to get to the end of. You've got to get that thing solved, because it's not that it's over. It's just that that there's more to come. There's more adventure. There's more whatever that is. And taking on the challenge of writing, that's huge. Like that's huge, because how alien is that in the terms of what you considered your skill sets to be,
big time, big time.
Yeah.
It's a whole different muscle, and
Yeah.
it's one that is certainly underdeveloped in my in my life. But
But you got
hopefully I'll
time.
develop it more. So
Yeah, you've got plenty of time to keep developing that. And it's, you're going to find that that's going to be a whole new, palette of tools. It's going to be a bigger brush. That's what it's going to be. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just uh, you got to know what you don't know. You have to network with people and learn from other people,
Mm-hmm.
and you just can't. I don't want to say don't be afraid, but be be persistent and be open and be curious and do all that stuff. Because
Yeah,
it's the only way we grow and change as people.
totally. Well, I got to track down that Motorhead graphic novel. I got to see what that's all about.
Yeah,
Um, Anything you want to just kind of get out there for people to like, hey, you guys are Mad Cave's making this thing and you got to check it out. I mean,
yeah.
Trump.
I'll throw out a quick plug for Mark London, who is our owner. He's also a writer, which is why he started Mad Cave. And his book, Hunt, Kill, Repeat, is started to hit the shelves, and it is super fun and crazy. It's, Kill Bill meets the Greek gods. So very, very fun story.
Oh,
But
cool.
yeah, I'll throw out a plug for that. And other than that, yeah, just keep your eye on Mad Cave. We're doing some incredible stuff. We have some massive announcements coming that I can only allude to. I can't actually
Yes.
announce. But yeah, we're trying to do fun stuff, and I'm very happy to be at a company that supports fun, big ideas. So
Yeah. I love the big story. So that's important to me. Yeah, I'll have all the links in the description. So anybody wants to scroll down below, they'll be able to get to Matt Cave. They'll be able to follow you if they're so up for it. If you are interested in what's happening in the world of rush fanning,
yeah,
it's the best place to go. Um, yeah, Mark, man, I knew that when we first bumped into each other at Charlotte, I was like, oh, this guy's going to be someone I want to talk with. I appreciate your time.
thanks,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, yeah. No, this has been great, and it's kind of cool, man. You were there. So many things happening, in this industry. So you've got a book in you about the things that you've done. Just say,
Maybe. I mean, I'm definitely
yeah,
a footnote, but I always appreciate that I was sort of there, when it was all going on. So, yeah,
yeah.
good
That's
time.
awesome, man. Yeah. Well, we'll talk soon. Okay.
Sounds great. Thank you so much,
All right.
Alex.